James Wan's most unique film. Join me to the end to learn why Malignant is an underrated horror gem of the 2020s. Released in 2021, Malignant was directed by James Wan, most famous for creating the Saw and Conjuring franchises, and at the time, recently directing the blockbuster hits of Furious 7 in 2015 and Aquaman in 2018. Coming off of those box office successes, Wan was basically given a blank checkbook by Warner Brothers. And when he announced his next project would be a horror film, the genre he had his roots in, it seemed to be a no-brainer. But when it bombed at the box office and the critics were relatively mixed, Malignant was thought to be a huge disappointment. Personally, I avoided it myself, falling into that popular opinion of it being a letdown, and avoided it until I actually picked up a copy earlier this year. With that said, let's dive onto this wild ride that the movie takes you on. Madison is a pregnant woman living in Seattle with her abusive husband. One night, her life is turned upside down. As she struggles to recover from the horrific ordeal, she begins having vivid, trance-like visions in which she is forced to watch a black-gloved, hooded figure brutally murder people, powerless to do anything. Aided by her sister Sydney, they try to figure out what is happening. During this process, they come into contact with a pair of detectives, Kakoa Shaw and Regina Moss, initially investigating the original crime before setting their sights on this emerging serial killer. As the investigation into the killer deepens, truths and secrets come to light about Madison's past. A past dark, twisted, and to Madison's horror, connected to the killer she's having her visions about. Everything comes to an explosive final act that leaves all of our characters affected and is sure to have your jaw on the floor. Madison, or Maddie, as her sister affectionately calls her, is one hell of a protagonist. Not only is the performance fantastic, what I really want to focus on is the casting itself. Annabelle Wallis is most often seen as a blonde, but in this, she rocks that long brown hair. She also has these striking, bright blue eyes that the camera never fails to focus on. You know, I'm pointing out these superficial features because she embodies perfectly the classic archetypal lead of giallo films. That is far from the only allusion to the Italian subgenre, but I love that our protagonist perfectly embodies it. What's more is how our other characters embody their own archetypes and allusions to many giallo features. Sydney is the feisty, strong-willed blonde, while Kakoa and Regina are our classic pair of detectives seen in many great giallo works. Gabriel, our malicious and mysterious serial killer, draws many visual elements from classic giallo killers. The black gloves, the dark trench coat, even the distinct blade that he makes his signature weapon. I mean, many giallo films and the American equivalent of slashers have that signature blade. Separate from the giallo, but tapping into another influence Wan used for this film, is that 80s to 90s bonkers horror a la Stuart Gordon and latter days John Carpenter. And it's our main victims for the story. The doctors from the film's opening who ran and operated Simeon Research Hospital. Flat characters, but they serve a purpose. And I just love how our main doctor perfectly embodies the Lovecraftian model of the over-the-top doctor who isn't necessarily evil, but is driven to extreme actions by her patient. Let's stay right here with the doctors, and more specifically, their place of work. This Simeon Research Hospital. What an incredible setting that gave me goosebumps on the rewatch. the architecture, that placement by the water on the cliffside. What is it about cliffside structures that makes me drown in the feels? Some versions of Arkham Asylum do this. Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated had the very important church in the first season. Then this place. Perfect setting with a chef's kiss of cinematography. Daylight, moonlight, give it to me. Broadening out, the choice of setting the film in Seattle is nothing short of genius. Not only does this city offer unique visual flair, Seattle offers its own character to include in the story by showing the underground world of Old Seattle. Not only is it cool to explore, but by centering so many set pieces around an underground world, we are welcoming in the idea of secrets being buried. We'll get there soon, but thematically, this is so relevant to our story. Even broader, let's talk about that distinct James Wan visual style that he made important tweaks to better reflect the story. It's modern and cinematic, dazzling to the eye with its amazing camera movements and sweeping shots that are perfectly embodied in our final act of fight/massacre in the police station when Gabriel is let loose. This takes the movie to the next level and shows how unforgiving it will be with its beautiful, bloody carnage. On those sweeping shots themselves, they're really not too dissimilar from Giallo master Dario Argento's most interesting work. And doubling down on Argento, the use of the red-colored lighting draws both strong comparison to Suspiria and more generally perfectly captures the visual feel of Giallo. Add in the rain, a Giallo and Seattle must, along with those eerie flickering lights, and you have mind-blowing cinematography. But all of that leads to the film's cherry on top. The vision sequences have their own distinct visual cue as the settings melt into one another, morphing before our eyes from one house to another. Not only does it tell us exactly what is happening, it creates an eerie sense of dread, as we know a vision means something very bad is about to happen. I got 3 distinct flavors when listening to the sound design and score for Malignant. The first was that banging synth, almost rock metal style of music that just got you bumping. Emphasized most in the wide shots I gushed over for Simeon Research Hospital, as well as that bonkers fight scene. The second was the almost operatic style music, less vocals and more atmospheric, that is mostly dark throughout, but emotionally heightened during particularly pivotal scenes. And finally, the chords throughout, blended within the first 2 styles and then distinct on its own, is something I can only describe as giving that giallo feeling. The pacing for Malignant is fantastic. It's not so fast that you can't catch up. It's that perfect speed where things resonate, but everything keeps constantly escalating. But let's back up. The opening is insane. Going back to Simeon Research Hospital, our opening scene is just bonkers and straight out of Reanimator or From Beyond, giving it a great throwback vintage feel that I love. Back to escalation though. Things slow down as we are introduced to Maddie and her abusive husband, but only briefly. Things really begin to ramp up. Spoilers, by the way, for the rest of this section. Okay, so Maddie's husband ends up getting brutally killed in a seeming home invasion, and then Maddie is attacked, unfortunately losing her baby in the process. Emotionally devastated, not long after Gabriel becomes our on-screen killer, hiding behind the shadows in his Giallo-inspired costume. I won't go into all the twists and reveals, but I will focus on the biggest one. Revealed right before the police station massacre in a great final act twist, we find out that Gabriel is in fact Maddie's parasitic twin that was once attached to the back of her head and body. When Gabriel became too violent and unruly, he was surgically removed with the remaining part of him pushed back into Maddie's skull. Revealed in a few different ways, namely in Sydney finding lost videotapes, recording the truth of Simeon Research Hospital, as well as Maddie ripping the back of her skull open, showing what happens every time Gabriel takes over. So that is all batshit, bonkers. But what I love is how this is all set up throughout the movie. Multiple times, Maddie would seemingly get a headache and then rub the back of her head to find blood. It is shown to us plain as day. But we just thought it was her still dealing with the trauma of her last encounter with her husband. Nope. It's Gabriel about to take over her body and lock Maddie in this mind prison where she doesn't know what's going on. And it's this perspective where she would be trapped to watch Gabriel commit his murders. I began this review with that line from Maddie. An early moment that you now see was beautiful foreshadowing. Yet another is when Maddie says, "buried in the back of my head." I mean, come on. I love how on the nose it is upon rewatch. But going further, I love how this and the first 2/3 of the film, there's an unreliable narrator. Maddie really doesn't know what's going on. But the truth she believes is completely manipulated, thus manipulating the narrative and what we are shown as the audience. Malignant isn't a perfect movie, but the thing is, it was never meant to be. Instead, James Wan decided to blend the schlocky horror of the 70s through the 90s with a modern visual flair and storytelling. And in the end, what we get is an awesome, bonkers, throwback Giallo extravaganza that just goes for it. And for me, when it works as well as this, I love to back a film that takes risks and has a lot of fun along the way. Malignant is one hell of a great movie. Without question, it is one of James Wan's best films and certainly his most unique and underrated. And for me, I will give Malignant an almost perfect 4.5 out of 5 stars. So let me know, what do you think of Malignant? Do you agree with me that it's an underrated, incredible film? Or are you on the opposite side and think I'm giving it way too much credit? Would love to hear all your thoughts down below. Could you also give this video a like, share it with someone who you think might like the movie, and definitely subscribe. And until the next time, what's your favorite scary movie?